He thought he was buying $500 worth of junk. But he actually bought the evidence for 12 cold cases that the police had been hunting for over 30 years.
Most people spend their Saturday mornings at the local diner or sleeping in. But I'm usually out on some gravel road in rural Ohio. My hobby, or my side hustle if you want to call it that, is buying out abandoned storage units and old garages. It's like gambling for people who like manual labor. I spend hours scrolling through Craigslist or hitting up local auctions, looking for that one unit where someone left behind something valuable. Most of the time, I'm just hauling away rusted lawnmowers, broken furniture, and stacks of old newspapers. It's a grind, and it's rarely glamorous. This particular garage was located about 15 miles outside of town, sitting at the end of a long, overgrown driveway. The siding was peeling, and the structure looked like it was leaning a few inches to the left. When I finally cut the padlock and rolled up the heavy metal door, the smell hit me immediately. It wasn't the smell of something dead, but that heavy, suffocating scent of damp concrete, mildew, and decades of stagnant air. I stepped inside and looked around at the piles of cheap plastic crates, a stained velvet sofa that was probably 6 feet long, and a mountain of cardboard boxes that had softened from the humidity. It looked like a standard, boring haul. I spent the first hour tossing out bags of trash and moving some old tires. I worked my way toward the back corner, where a heavy, grey top was draped over a stack of items. When I pulled the top back, I didn't find the vintage tools or the motorcycle parts I'd been hoping for. Instead, there were 3 heavy-duty, military-style plastic cases. They were airtight, the kind of gear people use for expensive camera equipment or tactical supplies. Each one had a strip of masking tape on the lid with a date scrawled in black permanent marker. The dates went back to the early 90s. I knelt down on the dusty floor and popped the latches on the first box. I expected to see some old collectible coins or maybe some antique jewelry. What I found instead made the hair on my arm stand up. The box was filled with small, clear Ziploc bags. Each bag contained a specific set of items: a woman's leather wallet, a set of car keys, and a driver's license. There were a dozen different licenses from several different states. Next to each wallet, tucked into the same bag, was a small lock of hair tied with a piece of twine. There weren't any tools in that box, just the personal belongings of 12 people who looked like they'd simply stepped out of their lives and never came back. I sat there on the cold garage floor for a long time, staring at a driver's license from 1994. The woman in the photo had a kind smile and shoulder-length hair. Her name was Sarah. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and typed her name into a search engine. The first result was a digitized newspaper archive with a headline that made my stomach drop: "Local mother vanishes on her way home." The article said she disappeared from a grocery store parking lot just 3 miles from where I was standing. She was never found. I looked back at the plastic bag in the box. I was holding her wallet. I was holding the last pieces of a life that her family had been praying to find for 30 years. I forced myself to move to the second box. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I had to know what was inside. When I popped the seals, I found hundreds of Polaroid photos. They weren't organized by date. They were grouped by person. Every photo was taken from a distance, through a living room window, from across a park, or from the backseat of a car. On the back of each photo, there were meticulous notes written in a cramped, neat hand. They listed daily routines. Leaves for work at 7:45 a.m. Stops for coffee at the corner of 5th and Main. Returns home at 5:15 p.m. Locks the back door, but leaves the kitchen window cracked for the cat. It wasn't just a collection. It was a manual for stalking. I started flipping through the photos faster, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. Then, I froze. I pulled out a stack of photos that looked older than the others, the colors fading into a yellowish tint. It was a woman standing in a driveway, laughing as she unloaded groceries from a station wagon. I recognized that house. I recognized that station wagon. It was my mother. The photos tracked her for weeks, standing in our backyard, walking me to the school bus when I was just a kid, and sleeping in her bedroom while the camera watched from the oak tree outside. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This person hadn't just been a stranger in a garage. He'd been in my yard. He'd been watching my life before I was even old enough to remember it. I reached for the third box with numb fingers. Inside were dozens of microcassette tapes, the kind used in old office dictaphones. Each one had a name scribbled on the label. I found a small, battery-operated player at the bottom of the box and pushed a tape in. I expected to hear screaming or begging, something that would match the horror of the situation. But the voice that came through the speaker was terrifyingly calm.
Linda, you have a neatness I admire. I have been planning our meeting for 6 months.
It was a man, and he sounded like a polite neighbor or a librarian. He wasn't shouting. The lack of emotion in his voice was worse than any scream I'd ever heard. I didn't call the cops right away. I should have, but I was in shock, and the sun was already starting to set. I hauled the 3 cases into the back of my Ford F-150 and drove home, locking every door and window the second I got inside. I planned to go to the precinct first thing in the morning. Around 2 a.m., I was sitting in my darkened kitchen, unable to sleep, when I noticed a glow reflecting off the wall. I walked to the window and moved the curtain just an inch. A beat-up, dark sedan was idling at the end of my driveway, maybe 50 feet from my front door. The headlights were on full beam, cutting through the darkness and pointing straight at my house. It just sat there, the engine rumbling low, waiting. I grabbed the folder of lease documents I'd snatched from the garage desk before leaving. My eyes scanned the faded ink on the original contract from 1992. The name at the bottom made my blood run cold. Arthur Miller. Everyone in this county knew that name. He was a retired sheriff's deputy, a man who'd been awarded a Silver Star for bravery after a shootout in the late 80s. He was the guy who coached Little League and organized the annual charity toy drive. He'd spent 30 years searching for the very women whose driver's licenses were now sitting in my truck. He wasn't just a neighbor. He was the person the community turned to for protection. I began digging through the very last folder in the second box, hoping the dates ended years ago. But they didn't. Toward the back, the Polaroids turned into high-resolution digital prints. There was a folder dated only 3 weeks ago. It contained photos of a young woman who worked at the local pharmacy, the one I visited every Tuesday. There were shots of her locking up the store, her walking her dog in the park, and even a photo of her through her bathroom window. The notes were still there, written in that same calm, neat handwriting. Arthur hadn't stopped. He wasn't a ghost from the past. He was an active predator, and he'd likely just chosen his next target. I reached for my phone to call 911, but the signal bar was at a dead zero. I tried to refresh my Wi-Fi, but the network name had disappeared entirely. A heavy realization hit me. He wasn't just sitting in that car. He was using a signal jammer. I ran to the kitchen to grab my landline, but the cord had been cut clean through from the outside. I heard a soft thud against the side of the house, right near the power box. A second later, the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into total darkness. I realized then that Arthur didn't just want his boxes back. He knew I'd seen his face in those files, and he couldn't let me leave that house with what I knew.
Mark managed to climb out of a basement window and sprinted half a mile to a neighbor's house to call the authorities. By the time a dozen squad cars arrived at the garage with search warrants, the dark sedan was gone. Forensics teams spent 3 days tearing the structure apart. Underneath the stained concrete floor, hidden by a heavy steel plate and 5 feet of dirt, they found a secondary chamber. It wasn't just a storage space. It was a soundproofed room. They recovered DNA samples from 18 different individuals, 6 more than the number of licenses Mark had found in the box. The hero of the community had been running a private execution chamber for 3 decades. Despite a nationwide manhunt and an Amber Alert that stayed active for months, Arthur Miller vanished into the woods of the Midwest. He left no trail, no bank activity, and no digital footprint. 6 months later, a local hunter browsing Craigslist for cheap storage space stumbled upon a new listing. It was the same leaning garage on the edge of the Ohio woods, listed for a bargain price under a different name. The description was simple: abandoned unit, contents unknown. Buyer takes all. The cycle was ready to begin again. And somewhere out there, Arthur was waiting for the next person to cut the lock. Thanks for listening to this story. It is wild how someone you trust can be a totally different person behind closed doors. What would you do if you found photos of your own family in a stranger's storage unit? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. This was an original story written just for this channel. Go ahead and check out our other videos for more true horror. Stay safe out there.